Deep in the Vermont woods, the trees hide a secret written in stone. From above, the forest canopy looks unbroken, a sea of green, but beneath those leaves, the ground is studded with thousands of strange, deliberate piles of rocks. These are the Vermont Mystery Cairns, an ancient puzzle scattered across the New England hills. By the end of this, you will understand why this could be one of North America's most overlooked and profound historical mysteries. We are going to investigate why they were built, who might have built them, and how something so massive could remain so unexplained. What does it mean when the land itself holds a story that no one alive can remember? A cairn is more than just a pile of rocks. It is a deliberate human structure, a landmark built with purpose. To understand the mystery, we first need to see what makes these formations so distinct. Picture a typical stone wall built by a farmer 2 centuries ago. Those rocks were pulled from a field and stacked in long, linear rows to mark a boundary or simply to get them out of the way. The goal was efficiency, clearing land for planting. The Vermont Mystery Cairns are nothing like that. These are concentrated, often dome-shaped or conical mounds, built with a clear sense of design. The stones are not just tossed together. They are often carefully selected and placed, sometimes with larger, flatter stones forming a stable base and smaller ones filling in the gaps, creating a solid, enduring form. They range from modest clusters you could hold in your hands to impressive structures several feet high and just as wide, containing hundreds of individual rocks. Their location is the first major clue. You do not find them in the middle of open, sunlit pastures where a farmer would have worked. Instead, they are almost always discovered deep in the woods on hillsides, nestled against large boulders or perched on rocky outcrops. This placement alone tells us they were not built for agriculture. They were built for the forest itself. The sheer number is staggering. We are not talking about a few dozen odd piles. Estimates suggest there are thousands upon thousands of these cairns across the state, hidden beneath the canopy. This scale of construction across such a vast, rugged landscape points to a shared cultural practice, a common knowledge that once guided hands across generations. So when you look at a simple, haphazard pile of stones cleared from a field, you see a byproduct of labor. But when you stand before one of these silent, conical stone sentinels in the deep woods, you are looking at a message. The question is, who was it meant for and what does it say? This was not the work of a single person, or even a single village. The mystery deepens when you step back and see the true scale of the landscape. We are not looking at a handful of odd rock piles in one remote forest. We are looking at a phenomenon that blankets the state of Vermont and spills over into the forests of New Hampshire and western Massachusetts. Conservative estimates suggest there are several thousand of these structures. More expansive surveys hint the true number could be in the tens of thousands. Picture a map of Vermont. Now, imagine dots appearing across that map, not clustered in one corner, but scattered from the southern border with Massachusetts all the way up toward the Canadian line. They fill river valleys, they climb the slopes of the Green Mountains, they stand silent on remote hilltops. There are famous concentrations, like the sprawling networks within Putnam State Forest or the dense fields reported around the Brattleboro area. But for every known site, there are likely a dozen more still hidden, waiting beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves. This was a regional practice, a shared tradition that once covered this entire corner of New England. Which makes the central question so much more compelling and so much harder to answer. Who possessed the time, the manpower, and the unified cultural motive to modify the landscape on such an astonishing scale? And then, perhaps the most haunting question of all, what happened to make them stop, leaving only these silent stone witnesses behind? For a very long time, the explanation seemed straightforward and practical. When early archaeologists and local historians first documented these stone mounds, they pointed to the most visible history they knew, the story written in the stone walls that still line so many New England roads. The theory was simple: these were just more farmers' walls, or rather, the discarded raw materials for them. The logic felt unassailable. Anyone who has tried to dig a garden in New England knows the ground itself grows rocks. For European settlers arriving in the 18th and 19th centuries, turning forest into productive farmland was a monumental task. It involved cutting down immense trees and then battling the glacial till, the endless supply of stones pushed down by ancient ice sheets. Clearing a single acre could yield tons of rock. The standard practice was to pile them at the edge of the field, and over time, those piles were often shaped into the orderly, linear walls we recognize today. So, when people stumbled upon mysterious rock piles in the woods, the assumption was natural: they were looking at the forgotten leftovers of an old farm, stones dumped by a settler who gave up or whose fields were later reclaimed by the forest. This farmer's wall theory was comforting. It placed the cairns within a known narrative, a story of hard work and homesteading. It made them a footnote to a familiar history, and for decades, that explanation held sway. It seemed too obvious to question, but a mystery only persists when the obvious answer begins to fray at the edges. The first cracks in this theory appear when you look at a map, and then you look at the land itself. If these were simply agricultural clearance piles, you would expect to find them on flat, fertile ground, the kind of land a farmer would choose to cultivate. Yet time and again, the cairns are discovered on steep, rocky hillsides, on narrow ledges, in swampy areas, and in dense, old-growth forest stands that show no historical evidence of ever having been cleared. They perch on terrain that would have been brutally impractical, if not impossible, to farm with 18th century tools. Furthermore, the arrangement starts to feel intentional. While some cairns appear solitary, many are found in deliberate patterns, in long rows, in clusters, or in grids that cover an entire hillside. This does not look like the random dumping of nuisance stones. This looks like a design. A farmer clearing a field wants the rocks gone as efficiently as possible. They do not carefully carry them deep into the woods to construct neat, dome-shaped mounds on a remote slope. The geography itself begins to whisper that the farmer's wall theory, while logical on the surface, cannot hold the weight of this mystery. It leaves too many stones unturned. The silence surrounding these stone piles is not just metaphorical. It is an actual, physical silence in the archaeological record. By the mid-20th century, the sheer number of reports about these formations could no longer be ignored by the academic world. Professional archaeologists finally left their traditional digs along riverbanks and village sites and ventured into the deep woods to see these mysteries for themselves. Pioneering researchers like William Ritchie, New York State archaeologist, began systematic surveys in the 1950s and 60s. They approached the cairns with standard archaeological methods, looking for the clues that normally unlock the past. They carefully examined the ground around and beneath the stone mounds. They sifted the soil. They looked for any sign of human activity beyond the rocks themselves. And they found almost nothing. This was the birth of a profound professional confusion. At a typical Native American site, you expect to find what archaeologists call cultural debris. Broken pieces of pottery, fragments of stone tools, flakes of chert or flint left over from tool-making, perhaps the charred remains of a cooking fire. These artifacts are the fingerprints of a people, the everyday evidence that places them in a specific time and place. But at the vast majority of these cairn sites, that evidence was utterly absent. The ground yielded no pottery shards, no arrowheads, no discarded tools. The cairns stood in a vacuum of associated material. For an archaeologist, this is deeply unusual and incredibly frustrating. It is like finding a beautifully crafted, obviously ancient book, but every single page inside is completely blank. The structure is there, screaming of human intention, but the context that explains who, when, and why has been meticulously erased by time. This lack of artifacts created immediate skepticism. without physical objects to analyze and date. Attributing the cairns to a specific culture became a matter of speculation, not science. The professional view began to harden. If these were ancient Native American constructions, where was all the supporting evidence? The silent stones offered no answers, only a deeper, more stubborn mystery. The stones themselves hold no memory of time. This is the core of the dating dilemma, the invisible clock that has stalled our understanding for generations. Unlike a piece of wood or a fragment of bone, a rock does not contain organic material. It cannot be subjected to radiocarbon dating, the workhorse of archaeology that has placed so many other ancient sites on a firm timeline. The cairns are essentially sterile, chemically inert monuments. Their age is locked away, and the key has been incredibly difficult to find. Researchers have had to turn to more creative, and often far less precise, methods to try and pin a date on these silent structures. One approach is lichenometry, the study of lichen growth on rock surfaces. The idea is that when a fresh rock face is exposed, it takes time for lichens, those crusty, symbiotic organisms, to establish themselves and begin spreading. By measuring the diameter of the largest lichen on a cairnstone and comparing it to a known growth rate for that species in the region, scientists can estimate a minimum age for the pile. But this method is fraught with variables. Lichen growth is not constant. It is affected by sunlight, moisture, air quality, and the specific chemistry of the rock itself. A date derived from lichen can offer a very broad window, perhaps narrowing it down to a few centuries, but it cannot give us a specific year or even a reliable decade. Another avenue is to look not at the stones, but at what lies beneath them. The theory is simple. When the cairn was built, it sealed the ground surface at that moment in time. By carefully excavating the soil directly under the center of a cairn, archaeologists hope to find trapped pollen grains or microscopic charcoal from ancient fires. Analyzing that material can provide a snapshot of the environment when the cairn was constructed, yet here, too, the results have been maddeningly inconsistent and open to interpretation. Some soil samples have yielded charcoal dates suggesting activity just a few hundred years ago, aligning uncomfortably with the colonial period. Others, however, point to a much deeper past, with evidence stretching back 2, 3, even 4,000 years. This wild range of dates creates more confusion than clarity. It suggests the landscape was used and perhaps modified by different peoples across millennia. But which date corresponds to the actual construction of the cairn? Is the charcoal from a campfire built by the cairn builders, or from a natural forest fire that swept through centuries before the first stone was ever lifted? Without a direct, unambiguous link, the soil evidence whispers possibilities but refuses to speak a definitive truth. This is the paralyzing reality of the Vermont cairns. Without a reliable way to date them, attempting to place them in a historical context is an exercise in frustration. It is like trying to assemble a vast, intricate puzzle without any of the corner pieces. You can see shapes and patterns, you can guess at the bigger picture, but you cannot be sure how any of the fragments truly fit together, or even if they all belong to the same puzzle at all. The clock is invisible and its hands are stuck, pointing in every direction at once. The farmer's wall theory cannot explain the silence in the soil, nor the deliberate placement in the deep woods. This void of evidence has forced researchers to look beyond colonial history to the people who walked these forests for thousands of years before European contact. The leading alternative theory points to the indigenous cultures of the Northeast, suggesting these cairns are part of a sacred, pre-Columbian landscape. To understand this possibility, we must step into the worldview of the region's tribes, like the Abenaki. Their relationship with the land was not one of ownership, but of deep spiritual connection. The forest was not an obstacle to be cleared, it was a living community, a source of sustenance and meaning. Within this worldview, certain places held special power, a spring, a distinctive rock outcrop, a mountain peak. These were locations where the physical and spiritual worlds drew close. It was a common practice among many Native American cultures to enhance these sacred sites, to mark them and honor them, sometimes with offerings, sometimes with stone. We know that northeastern tribes did build with stone for practical purposes. Hunting blinds, low stone walls used to funnel deer, are well documented. Memorial piles or burial cairns are known from other regions. Simple trail markers, a few stones stacked to indicate a path, are a universal human practice. But what if the Vermont cairns represent something more profound than mere utility? What if they are part of a ceremonial geography, a vast, interconnected network of sites designed to communicate with the spirit world? This concept is known as a sacred landscape, where natural features are imbued with meaning and human modifications amplify that meaning. A single cairn on a hilltop might mark a place for vision quests. A line of cairns could trace a ceremonial pathway or a boundary between worlds. A cluster might signify a place of prayer or mourning. The stones themselves, pulled from the earth, could be seen as physical prayers, each placement an act of reverence. There are compelling comparisons from other parts of North America. In the American Southwest, you find countless cairns, often called trail shrines, left by Pueblo peoples along migratory routes. In the mountains of the West, similar piles mark high-altitude prayer sites. These are not random acts, they are a cultural language written in rock. While the styles differ, the underlying principle resonates. Humans using stone to inscribe spiritual intent upon the land. Perhaps the most significant evidence comes not from a trowel or a soil sample, but from living memory. Some modern Abenaki oral traditions and perspectives acknowledge these stone piles as part of their ancestral heritage. Tribal elders have spoken of the cairns as markers, as memorials, as places where one should speak softly and show respect. This is not a claim of specific authorship for every single pile, but a recognition that such practices were within their cultural knowledge. It suggests a continuity of understanding, a thread connecting the present to a deep past where modifying the landscape in this way was a known and meaningful act. This perspective transforms the mystery from an archaeological puzzle into a story of cultural endurance. The stones may not whisper their age, but they might still hold an echo of their original purpose, a purpose rooted in a relationship with the land that viewed the forest not as a resource, but as a relative. Yet the mystery of the cairns extends beyond the earth and into the sky. If these stone piles are part of a sacred landscape, perhaps they were also a way to map the heavens. A compelling and controversial theory suggests that some of these complexes are not random at all, but deliberately placed to align with celestial events. Researchers like Byron Dix and James Maver spent years surveying cairnfields, armed with compasses, theodolites, and a deep knowledge of archaeoastronomy. They proposed that specific lines of cairns or solitary mounds positioned on high ridges acted as permanent sighting stones. Their investigations pointed to potential alignments with the solstice sunrises and sunsets, the extreme rising points of the moon during its long cycle, known as a lunar standstill, or even with the heliacal rising of bright stars like Sirius. One famous site often discussed is the complex at Calendar One, located in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. Here, a central cairn is surrounded by a ring of stones, and from this central point, lines of sight through other stone features appear to mark the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. At another site, a long row of cairns stretches across a hillside, forming a stone arrow that seems to point directly to the horizon where the sun would first appear on the morning of the equinox. To stand at one of these cairns on such a morning, watching the sun crest the hill exactly where the stones direct your gaze, is an experience that feels undeniably intentional. It suggests a people deeply attuned to the cycles of time, using the immutable landscape to track the passage of seasons, to predict the coming of winter or the promise of spring. This astronomical theory transforms the cairns from simple markers into a kind of forest calendar, a permanent almanac written in granite. The visual evidence can be striking. Imagine a graphic overlay on footage, a line drawn from a central cairn, extending over the treetops to meet the glowing disk of the sun precisely at a notch in the distant mountains. It creates a powerful, almost cinematic connection between human hands and cosmic order. But is this connection real, or are we seeing patterns we desperately want to see? The controversy here is fierce and fundamental. Skeptics argue that with thousands of cairns scattered across the hills, purely by random chance, some of them will inevitably line up with significant solar or lunar events. If you have enough stones, you will eventually create a convincing alignment. They question whether the builders, without written records, could or would have engineered such precise and widespread astronomical markers. Furthermore, verifying an alignment requires knowing the exact date of construction, because the precise position of celestial risings shifts minutely over centuries due to a slow wobble in the Earth's axis. A cairn built 3,000 years ago would have pointed to a slightly different spot on the horizon than it does today. So, are we measuring a true ancient intention, or are we accidentally imposing a modern pattern onto an ancient mystery? This debate lies at the heart of the cairn enigma. It asks us to consider the line between profound purpose and profound coincidence. It challenges us to decide if we are looking at a forgotten science etched in stone, or if the silent forest is simply reflecting our own desire for answers back at us. The silence of a single cairn is one thing, but the conversation between them is something else entirely. To truly grasp the scale of intention here, we must zoom out. In many of these forest sites, the solitary stone mound is not an isolated artifact. It is often just one component in a much larger, more elaborate arrangement. Archaeologists walking these woods have documented not just piles, but entire complexes of stone features that defy any simple agricultural explanation. Alongside the conical cairns, you find low, sinuous stone walls that twist through the trees, but these walls do not form pens or property lines. They do not enclose anything practical. They meander, they curve, they sometimes connect clusters of cairns like a stone pathway. In other places, you encounter what can only be described as platforms, wide, flat areas meticulously paved with stones, often situated with a commanding view. There are stone rows that run for hundreds of feet up a hillside, ending not at a fence post, but at a prominent boulder or another cairn. Some sites feature what appear to be open enclosures, circular or oval spaces defined by low stone borders, with one or more cairns positioned carefully inside or just outside the ring. The layout feels orchestrated. At a place like the Gage Hill complex in Vermont, cairns are arranged in clear lines and deliberate clusters across several acres. It is not a scatter of rocks, it is a composition. This pattern of associated features is the strongest argument against the idea of random field clearing. A farmer dumping stones does not build a ceremonial platform. A settler does not construct a meandering, purposeless wall deep in an uncultivable swamp. These elements together suggest a planned space, a location designed for gathering, for ceremony, for something that required a specific and meaningful environment. We can find echoes of this concept in other parts of the ancient world. Think of the great stone circles of Britain, like Stonehenge or Avebury. Those sites are not just about the massive standing stones. They include processional avenues, burial mounds, and smaller satellite circles, all working together to create a ritual landscape. In the American Southwest, Chaco Canyon features great houses, kivas, and precisely aligned roads that integrate architecture with the surrounding mesas and solar cycles. These are places where the built environment and the natural world were fused to serve a cultural and spiritual purpose. The Vermont complexes, though built on a humbler scale with local materials, seem to follow a similar principle. The cairns, the walls, the platforms, they are not separate puzzles. They are pieces of a single, larger puzzle. When you see a line of cairns leading to a stone-paved platform overlooking a valley, you are not looking at farm work. You are looking at a destination. This complexity moves the discussion beyond a debate about individual piles. It forces us to consider that entire tracts of forest were once actively managed as sacred spaces. The evidence on the ground is not whispering about agriculture. It is speaking, in a clear and structured stone language, about ceremony, community, and a deep, enduring connection to the land itself. The purpose may be lost, but the design remains, a ghostly blueprint of a forgotten ritual written across the New England hills. Walk along a mossy Vermont hillside and listen. Beneath the rustle of leaves, you might hear the faint, constant trickle of water. This sound is not just background noise in the mystery of the cairns. It is a critical clue. Researchers mapping these sites have noticed a pattern so consistent it cannot be accidental. A remarkable number of these stone piles are found in intimate conversation with water. They cluster around the heads of springs, where fresh water first bubbles from the earth. They line the damp edges of seasonal streams that flow only with the snowmelt. They stand sentinel where the land grows soft and boggy, marking the transition from solid ground to wetland. This is not a casual relationship. It feels deliberate, a repeated choice by the builders to place their stone monuments at the very places where the earth gives up its most vital resource. To understand this, we must step away from our modern view of water as something that simply comes from a tap. For prehistoric cultures, and for many indigenous worldviews, water was alive. It was sacred. A spring was not just a convenient source of drinking water. It was a portal, a living pulse of the earth, a place where spirits were believed to dwell. Water was the essence of life, purification, and renewal. Across the globe, from Celtic Europe to the pueblos of the Southwest, springs were revered as holy sites, often adorned with offerings, coins, beads, carved figures thrown into the water as gifts to the unseen powers. Could the Vermont cairns be a monumental version of this ancient practice? Instead of tossing a single coin, perhaps the builders carried and placed stones, each one a physical prayer, an enduring offering of gratitude or supplication to the spirit of the spring. The cairn would then serve as a permanent marker of the sacred spot, a way to honor and protect it. This idea transforms the stone piles from simple markers into active participants in a spiritual dialogue. They are not just beside the water, they are in relationship with it. Another possibility ties water to the practical mystery of survival. In a vast, trackless forest, knowing the location of a reliable spring, especially a small, hidden one that might dry up in summer, would be crucial knowledge. A cairn could act as a highly visible, permanent signpost for a vital resource, a way to pass critical survival information from one generation to the next. But perhaps the connection is even more intricate. Some researchers speculate about water divination or ceremonial practices. Certain cairn arrangements, particularly those on slopes above springs, might have been used in rituals to honor rain or to ensure the continued flow of water. The stones themselves, pulled from the earth, could symbolize a reciprocal exchange, giving something of the land back to the water that sustains it. This recurring environmental clue, the water connection, does more than suggest a function. It opens a window into the builder's worldview. It strongly supports the idea of an animistic landscape, a belief that the natural world is imbued with spirit. In such a world, a spring has a personality, a mountain has a presence, and a forest is a community of living beings. Building a cairn at such a place is an act of communication, a way to acknowledge and engage with that spirit. It ties the human community directly to the ecological heartbeat of the land. When you find a cairn silently keeping watch over a trickling seep in the deep woods, you are not just looking at a pile of rocks near water. You are likely witnessing the physical remnant of a conversation, a centuries-old act of reverence for the very force that makes life possible. The stones hold their silence, but the water never stops speaking. But the stones have whispered other names across the Atlantic. Among the most controversial and enduring theories is the idea that the builders were not Native Americans at all, but pre-Columbian voyagers from Europe. This is the Celtic fringe theory, a story that exploded into public consciousness in the 1970s and refuses to fade. Its most famous proponent was a marine biologist named Barry Fell. In his book America, BC, Fell argued that ancient Celts from the British Isles sailed to New England centuries before Columbus. He pointed to the very word itself, cairn, which is a Gaelic term for a man-made pile of stones, commonly found across the Scottish and Irish landscapes. The visual similarity is undeniable. The conical, dome-shaped stone piles of Vermont do bear a striking resemblance to ancient cairns in the Celtic world, some built as tombs, others as boundary markers. Fell and his supporters went further, claiming to have found the smoking gun, inscriptions. They pointed to certain scratched markings on stones near some cairn sites, interpreting them as Ogam, an ancient Celtic alphabetic script used primarily in early medieval Ireland. These alleged translations told stories of Celtic explorers, dedications to gods, and records of voyages. It was a thrilling narrative, a complete rewrite of history that captured the public imagination. Here was a tangible, romantic link to the Old World, a secret chapter of transatlantic contact written in stone. The theory offered a seemingly neat solution. It explained the lack of typical Native American artifacts by suggesting the builders were someone else entirely, and it provided a direct cultural analog from across the sea. For many, it felt like a key finally turning in a locked door. Mainstream academia, however, responded not with curiosity, but with a furious and nearly unanimous rejection. Linguists and epigraphers examined the so-called Ogam inscriptions and dismissed them as glacial scratches, plow marks, or natural weathering on stone. They argued that the markings showed no consistent grammar, vocabulary, or stylistic hallmarks of genuine Ogam. Archaeologists leveled a more fundamental critique, the complete absence of a cultural package. If Celtic explorers had established a presence substantial enough to build thousands of stone monuments across Vermont, where was everything else they would have brought? Where are the distinctively Celtic tools, the metal artifacts, the pottery styles, the settlement patterns, the evidence of their language in place names, or their DNA in the archaeological record? Sustained cultural presence leaves a thick layer of evidence, not just a single type of structure. The archaeological silence, which was a problem for the Native American theory, became a deafening roar against the Celtic one. To most scholars, the theory was not just wrong. It was a damaging distraction that disregarded the sophisticated cultures already present in the Americas. Yet, despite this fierce scholarly dismissal, the Celtic fringe theory persists powerfully in the public imagination. Its endurance speaks to something deeper than evidence. It taps into a romantic yearning for lost worlds and forgotten voyages. It simplifies a complex, indigenous mystery by substituting a familiar European actor. In a way, the theory itself is a kind of modern cairn, a structure built not from stone, but from desire, a marker placed on the confusing landscape of the past because we long for a story we feel we already understand. The divide over these stone piles runs deep, not just through the forest, but through the very halls of academia. For many mainstream archaeologists, the official stance on the Vermont cairns remains one of profound skepticism. The default classification in archaeological surveys is often a simple, dismissive phrase, historic period agricultural features. This is not necessarily a belief, but a professional caution. In the world of science, the burden of proof rests on those making an extraordinary claim, and claiming these structures represent a vast, pre-Columbian sacred landscape is, without solid dating or cultural artifacts, an extraordinary claim. The established methodology of archaeology is built on a foundation of tangible evidence, artifacts, stratigraphy, radiocarbon dates. The cairns, in their stubborn silence, offer little of that. Without proof, the safest, most conservative position is to attribute them to the last known, well-documented period of landscape alteration, the colonial farmers. To suggest otherwise without irrefutable evidence is to risk professional credibility. Studying a topic often labeled fringe or alternative archaeology carries real career risk. Academic advancement depends on publishing in respected journals, securing grants, and contributing to the consensus body of knowledge. Dedicating years to a mystery that may never yield a definitive, publishable answer is seen by many as a professional dead end. It is far safer to focus on sites with clear cultural layers, known pottery types, and datable material. The cairns represent a frustrating outlier, a puzzle that resists the standard toolkit. This creates a vicious cycle. Without academic interest, there is little funding for large-scale, multidisciplinary study. Without large-scale study, the evidence remains elusive. And without evidence, academic interest remains minimal. Yet, the mystery has not been abandoned entirely. A dedicated cadre of researchers, often operating outside the traditional university system, has refused to let the question die. Organizations like the New England Antiquities Research Association, or NEARA, have been meticulously documenting these sites for decades. Their members include both passionate amateurs and credentialed archaeologists who believe the mystery warrants serious attention. They conduct systematic surveys, map complexes with GPS, and advocate for the protection of these fragile sites from logging and development. Their work is painstaking and often thankless, driven by a conviction that the official story is incomplete. Within academia itself, a handful of scholars have also engaged with the enigma, carefully publishing papers that explore the possibilities of ceremonial stone landscapes, while rigorously noting the limitations of the evidence. They walk a tightrope, applying scientific scrutiny to a subject often clouded by speculation. This is a classic and enduring clash. On one side stands established methodology, demanding proof and wary of stories that outrun the facts. On the other stands a tantalizing, evidence-light mystery that whispers of a different history, one that demands we question the comfortable narrative. The stones themselves are caught in the middle, silent witnesses to a modern debate about how we understand the past, and what we are willing to believe when the only testimony is written in unyielding rock. A stubborn professional skepticism could not erase the stones from the land, but a new technology is finally pulling them from the shadows. For centuries, the dense canopy of the New England forest has been the mystery's greatest guardian, hiding the true scope of these structures from anyone standing on the ground. A researcher could spend a lifetime walking a single hillside and still miss the larger design, but in the 21st century, we have learned to see through the leaves. The revolution has a name, LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine an aircraft flying high above the Vermont woods, equipped not with a camera, but with a laser scanner. It fires millions of invisible laser pulses toward the Earth every second. Most pulses hit the tops of trees and branches, but a fraction penetrate tiny gaps in the foliage and strike the ground, rock, and stone walls below. By measuring the precise time it takes for each pulse to bounce back, a computer can build an astonishingly detailed, three-dimensional map of the bare Earth, digitally stripping away every single tree, bush, and fern. What remains is a ghostly, gray-scale image of the true ground surface, a landscape laid bare for the first time in centuries. When archaeologists overlay these LiDAR maps onto known forest areas, the results are nothing short of breathtaking. The screen erupts with patterns. What looked like a uniform green woodland transforms into a canvas dotted with thousands of tiny, bright white pinpricks. Each one is a cairn. They appear in clusters, in long, snaking lines, in geometric grids that cover entire mountainsides. Meandering stone walls, invisible from the ground, trace elegant, purposeful curves across the terrain. Vast stone pavements and platform structures emerge with perfect clarity. The scale revealed is staggering. dwarfing even the most optimistic ground surveys. It confirms that for every known cairn, there are dozens, perhaps hundreds, more waiting silently in the neighboring woods. This is not just finding more of the same puzzle pieces. LiDAR is revealing the puzzle's full border and its most intricate connections. From the air, patterns emerge that are impossible to perceive when you are standing beside a single pile of rocks. A line of cairns might run perfectly straight for hundreds of feet, pointing unerringly toward a distant mountain peak or a bend in a river. Clusters form clear circles or oval shapes. Networks of stone walls connect multiple cairn fields across ridges and valleys, suggesting these were not isolated sites, but parts of an integrated system. This technology removes all doubt that these are random agricultural leftovers. No farmer would create such elaborate, artistic, and hidden designs. LiDAR provides the first hard, visual proof of a grand, pre-planned design etched across the landscape. It adds immense fuel to the mystery, not by solving it, but by magnifying it 100-fold. We are no longer just looking at a few strange rock piles. We are looking at the ghostly blueprint of an entire forgotten world, a sacred geography written in stone and hidden for centuries beneath a blanket of green. The forest has kept its secret, but now light has found a way in. The LiDAR map is a revelation on a screen, but the true weight of the mystery is felt only with your feet on the ground. Let us walk into that digital ghost map and make it real. You leave the gravel forestry road and push into the woods, following no path. The air cools, the light turns green and dappled. Your boots crunch over last year's leaves. At first, you see nothing but trees and the usual forest scatter of moss-covered rocks. Then, your eye catches a shape that is just a little too regular. You stop there. Nestled against the base of a massive glacial erratic boulder is a dome of stones. It is about knee-high, constructed with flat, plate-like rocks stacked with a clear stability. This is your first cairn. A thrill of discovery flashes through you. You have found one, but as you stand there, the quiet of the woods changes. It becomes watchful. You take a few steps to the side, peering through the tree trunks, and there, 20 feet away, is another one, and another, partly hidden by a fallen log. You climb a slight rise, and the hillside seems to open its eyes. Dozens of stone mounds emerge from the leaf litter, scattered across the slope in a loose, seemingly deliberate pattern. The feeling is immediate and profound. You are not just visiting a site, you are standing inside it. Now you start to look with an investigator's eye. First, examine the stones themselves. These are not the rounded, river-washed cobbles you might expect. They are angular, field stones, likely gathered from the immediate area. Notice how they are placed. The larger, flatter stones often form a stable base course, with smaller stones carefully fitted on top, creating that distinctive conical or dome-shaped profile. This is not a haphazard toss, it is a technique. Run your gaze along the hillside. Do the cairns form lines? Sometimes they appear in rows, like a stone colonnade marching up the slope. Look for other features over there. A low, sinuous line of stones weaves between two oak trees, a wall with no practical enclosure. To your left, the ground seems unusually level. Brushing away the leaves reveals a carefully laid pavement of stones, a platform with a clear view down the valley. These associated features are the critical context. A solitary cairn is a question, a cairn connected to a wall overlooking a platform, and aligned with others is a sentence in a larger story. As you move, think about alignment. Pull out a simple compass on your phone, stand at one prominent cairn and look through a gap in the trees toward another on a distant ridge. Note the bearing. Could this line point to where the sun rises on the summer solstice? The horizon itself becomes a tool. Look for notches in the distant mountains or clear gaps in the forest canopy that these stone lines might be framing. The investigation is a blend of observation and intuition. You are gathering physical clues while trying to sense the intention in the arrangement, but this must be done with profound respect. The most important rule is to leave no trace. Do not move a single stone. Do not dig around the base. Do not add rocks to the pile or rearrange them for a better photo. These are fragile historical documents, and your boot print or misplaced stone can erase centuries of subtle evidence and disrespect the site's integrity. Take only photographs, note only coordinates, and carry out any litter you find. The adventure is in the discovery, not the disturbance. To find these silent sentinels is to be granted an audience with the past. You listen with your eyes, you learn by leaving everything exactly as you found it, ensuring the next curious seeker can feel that same electric moment of finding a secret the forest has kept for centuries. This profound silence in the soil is the mystery's most baffling feature. If a community invested the staggering labor required to build thousands of these stone monuments, logic insists they must have spent considerable time in these places. People eat, they make tools, they repair clothing, they build fires, they drop things. At any typical prehistoric site in New England, you find the echoes of daily life everywhere. Walk along a riverbank known to be an old Native American fishing ground, and you might spot a scatter of flint flakes, the debris from sharpening a spear point. In a field that was once a village, fragments of pottery, broken cooking stones from a hearth, or the occasional lost arrowhead turn up with regularity. These are the fingerprints of habitation. The cairn sites have none of this. The ground around them is eerily clean. It is as if the builders arrived, placed each stone with deliberate care, and then vanished without leaving a single footprint, not a tool, not a shard, not a charcoal stain from a campfire. This artifact vacuum forces us to consider extraordinary possibilities. Perhaps these were not living spaces at all, but spaces kept ritually pure. In many sacred traditions worldwide, a ceremonial site is deliberately separated from the profane clutter of everyday life. The act of building the cairn itself might have been the entire purpose, a devotional practice where the only object brought to the site was the stone itself, and the only action taken was its placement. After the ceremony, everything was taken away, leaving the structure as the sole offering. This would explain the cleanliness, but it demands a remarkable, sustained cultural discipline across generations. Another possibility involves the relentless chemistry of the forest floor. New England soils, particularly in coniferous woods, are often highly acidic. Organic materials like bone, antler, leather, and even certain types of wood can dissolve completely in such an environment over centuries. A stone tool might last forever, but the wooden handle it was attached to would vanish without a trace. It is possible that a richer material record once existed and has simply been eaten away by the soil itself, leaving only the enduring stone behind, yet this still does not fully explain the lack of stone tools or pottery, which are inorganic and survive in acidic conditions elsewhere. The most haunting explanation is one of vast, stretched-out time. What if these sites were not hubs of constant activity, but were visited only on rare, special occasions over millennia? A single clan or spiritual leader might return to a specific hillside once a generation to add a stone to a cairn, or to perform a solstice ceremony. The cumulative effect over 2,000 years would be a massive, complex landscape, but the actual human footprint in any given century would be incredibly light, leaving almost no durable evidence behind. This idea transforms the cairns from projects into traditions, living rituals that pulsed slowly across the ages. When contrasted with the abundant evidence at village sites, this stark absence becomes its own kind of evidence. It tells us these places served a different purpose. They were not for living. They were for something else entirely, something that required leaving nothing behind but the stones and the silence. The stones are silent, but the earth beneath them holds a different kind of memory. To move beyond speculation, scientists have turned to the very ground the cairns stand upon, employing subtle techniques to rid a landscape that refuses to speak in artifacts. One of the most telling methods is the study of soil stratigraphy. Imagine carefully excavating a thin, precise column of soil from directly under the center of a cairn. As you go down, you are reading a history book written in layers of dirt. Each layer, or stratum, represents a different period in time. The goal is to find the ancient ground surface, the literal footprint of the earth on the day the first stone was placed. If that surface is intact and undisturbed below the cairn, it suggests the site was pristine, untouched before construction. More intriguingly, researchers sometimes find a layer of charcoal or ash sealed beneath the stones, evidence of a fire that burned at that exact spot before the cairn was built. This could be the remnant of a ceremonial fire, a signal that the act of building was preceded by a specific ritual. Finding this sealed surface is like finding a historical snapshot, a moment frozen in dirt, confirming human activity at that precise location at a specific point in the past. Another window into the past comes from the study of ancient pollen, a science called palynology. Pollen grains are incredibly tough, surviving for thousands of years in waterlogged, oxygen-poor environments like peat bogs or the muddy bottoms of forest ponds. Scientists use special coring tools to extract long, vertical tubes of muck from wetlands near cairn fields. Back in the lab, they analyze the pollen trapped in each layer of the core, identifying the types of plants that were dominant when that mud was deposited. This creates a timeline of the local forest's composition. The results from some sites near cairn complexes are revealing. In layers dating back 1 to 3,000 years, the pollen record sometimes shows a noticeable shift. The amount of pollen from large canopy trees like oak and pine decreases. At the same time, pollen from grasses, ferns, and sun-loving shrubs increases. This is the signature of an opening in the forest canopy. It is evidence that the landscape was not a continuous, unbroken wilderness when the cairns were likely built. The forest was more open, perhaps park-like, with clearings that allowed sunlight to reach the forest floor. This finding is a major piece of indirect evidence. An open forest changes the entire context of the mystery. It suggests the land was managed. Natural events like wildfires or windstorms can create clearings, but the sustained regional pattern hinted at in some pollen cores points toward human activity. People might have selectively burned underbrush or cut trees to encourage the growth of beneficial plants, to improve sightlines, or to create suitable spaces for gathering and ceremony. These clearings would have made the cairns visible from a distance, transforming them from hidden oddities into prominent landmarks within a managed landscape. They would have provided the space needed for groups to congregate around these stone features. The pollen, therefore, does more than just tell us about trees. It sketches a scene. It suggests a time when people moved through a more varied, more accessible woodland, a forest they actively shaped, and within that humanized landscape they built their stone sentinels, not in secret, but as integrated elements of a world they understood and influenced. The earth, in its quiet, layered language, is beginning to suggest that the cairns were not built in spite of the forest, but as a central part of its story. The impulse to mark the land with stone is a story told across the entire planet. To feel the weight of the Vermont mystery, we can look to other corners of the world where similar silent conversations between people and place are written in rock. Far across the Atlantic, on the island of Sardinia, stand the enigmatic Nurag. These are not simple piles, but massive, complex stone towers built by a Bronze Age civilization. While more architecturally sophisticated, they share a core principle with the Vermont cairns. They are enduring stone monuments placed with clear intention across the landscape, their full purpose still debated by scholars. They speak of a people using the most permanent material available to make a statement that would outlast them. Journey to the Arctic, and you will find the Inuit stone figures built by the Inuit peoples. These cairns often resemble humans and served as vital navigation markers across the featureless tundra, guides for hunters, or memorials for the departed. Here the function is clearer, survival and memory. but the material language of stacked stone is the same. Closer to the theoretical Celtic connection, the moors and mountains of the British Isles are dotted with ancient cairns. Some are monumental burial tombs, like those at Carnac in Brittany. Others are smaller trail markers or boundary stones. This landscape shows a long tradition of using cairns for both the sacred, honoring the dead, and the practical, defining a path. Even in the American Southwest, among the ancestral puebloan cliff dwellings, you find countless small stone piles along trails and on mesa tops. These are often interpreted as trail shrines, offerings left by travelers for safe passage, or markers for spiritual journeys. The similarities are haunting, yet the differences are equally instructive. The Sardinian Nurag are colossal works of communal architecture. The Arctic Inuktitut are often solitary and pragmatic. The Southwest shrines are frequently small and personal. Vermont's cairns seem to occupy a middle ground, more structured than a simple trail marker, but less architecturally complex than a fortress tower. They share the universal grammar of stacked stone, but the dialect, the specific style and arrangement, is uniquely their own. This global view does not prove that Celts built the Vermont cairns, or that Native Americans traded ideas with Sardinia. What it does is profoundly important. It removes the Vermont stones from isolation. It shows that building cairns is a near universal human response to landscape. When faced with a vast, powerful, or unknown terrain, humans across cultures and millennia have reached for the same simple, profound act, picking up a stone and placing it with purpose. It is a way to say, I was here, this place has meaning, we remember. This transforms the mystery from a bizarre, local anomaly into a chapter in a much larger human story. The Vermont cairns are not an outlier. They are a participant in a deep, ancient dialogue, one where the language is stone and the conversation spans the globe. While academic debate often stalls in the conference room, the search for answers has always thrived in the woods. For over half a century, the true guardians of this mystery have been not tenured professors, but dedicated volunteers armed with notebooks, cameras, and a deep passion for the landscape. The New England Antiquities Research Association, known as NEARA, stands at the forefront of this citizen science movement. Founded in the 1960s, NEARA represents a unique collective, its membership a tapestry of amateur historians, retired engineers, local landowners, archaeologists, and simply curious individuals united by one thing, a conviction that the stone sites of New England hold a story worth telling. They are the boots on the ground, the ones who have walked thousands of miles of forest, often following the faintest clues or old property deeds, to find and document what official surveys have missed. Their work is methodical and painstaking. When a new site is reported, a team will visit to verify its existence. They will clear minimal brush for visibility, but never move a stone. They take detailed photographs from multiple angles, record precise GPS coordinates, and make careful measurements of the cairns, walls, and any associated features. They note the type of stone, the construction style, and the relationship to nearby water sources or prominent landmarks. Over decades, this relentless, volunteer-driven effort has built something invaluable, a vast and growing database of site locations, a visual archive of photographs, and a repository of raw observational data that simply did not exist before. This citizen science model has been a double-edged sword for the mystery. On one hand, it has undeniably advanced basic knowledge. NEARA archives are often the first and only comprehensive record of a site, especially those on private land threatened by development or logging. Their documentation provides the essential raw material that any future academic study would require. They have mapped complexes in stunning detail, revealing patterns and connections that are impossible to see without their cumulative, on-the-ground perspective. This work has forced a wider recognition of the sheer scale of the phenomenon, yet this passion can also fuel controversy. Because NEARA welcomes all perspectives, its membership includes strong proponents of alternative theories, from the Celtic connection to more speculative ideas about ancient transoceanic contact. At conferences and in their publications, these theories are discussed and debated with earnest enthusiasm. To mainstream archaeologists, this sometimes blurs the line between open-minded inquiry and fringe speculation, making some professionals hesitant to engage with the very data these groups have collected. It creates a difficult divide, where the people most intimately familiar with the sites are sometimes viewed with skepticism by the academic establishment trained to interpret them. Yet without these passionate researchers, the mystery might have faded into complete obscurity. They are the ones who keep the questions alive, who report new finds, who advocate for site preservation before a bulldozer arrives, and who patiently introduce newcomers to the quiet wonder of a stone-covered hillside. They operate in the space between official history and living curiosity, proving that some of the most important chapters of our past are not only written in peer-reviewed journals, but are also being patiently transcribed, stone by stone, by those who listen to the landscape. The forest silence is not just ancient, it is also punctuated by the sound of modern footsteps. This is the complicating layer that every serious researcher must confront. Not every stone pile you find in the Vermont woods is a relic of a forgotten past. Some are quite new, built by hikers following a trail tradition, by landowners clearing a field in recent decades, by artists creating land art, or even by pranksters seeking to muddy the waters of history. This modern activity creates a genuine and frustrating challenge for anyone trying to understand the true scope of the ancient mystery. It means that every single cairn discovered must be viewed with a critical eye, its authenticity questioned before it can be added to the map. The field of archaeology has a long and sometimes embarrassing history with misinterpretations and outright hoaxes, stories that serve as cautionary tales. The most famous is likely the Piltdown Man, a skull presented in England in the early 20th century as the missing link between apes and humans, which was later exposed as a clever forgery combining a human cranium with an orangutan's jaw. Closer to home, the infamous Cardiff giant, a 10-foot-tall petrified man unearthed in New York in 1869, was a gypsum statue buried as a money-making hoax, yet it fooled many experts and a fascinated public. These episodes remind us that the desire to find a dramatic story can sometimes outrun the evidence. So how do investigators in the woods today try to separate the truly old from the recently made? They look for the slow, patient signatures of time. Lichen growth is one key indicator. A cairn built 50 years ago will have a very different lichen community than one that has stood for 500. Researchers examine the size, type, and coverage of lichens, knowing that these organisms colonize stone at a glacial pace. Soil accumulation is another clue. An ancient cairn will often have a significant layer of soil built up between its stones, and its base will be partially sunk into the ground as centuries of leaf litter decompose and settle around it. A new pile sits conspicuously on top of the forest floor. Construction style offers subtle hints as well. Modern hiker cairns are often built for speed and visibility, using rounded, easily handled stones in a simple, unstable stack. Many of the older mystery cairns exhibit a more deliberate technique, with flat stones carefully fitted to create a stable, domed structure that sheds water and resists collapse. The presence of a modern trail nearby, or beer cans and recent footprints, can also signal a contemporary origin. This process of authentication is slow, meticulous, and never 100% certain. It requires humility. The modern builder, whether a respectful hiker or a mischievous hoaxer, has inserted themselves into the historical record, adding a new sentence to a story they may not fully understand. This layer of complication does not diminish the ancient mystery, it deepens it. It forces a discipline of observation, a reminder that the past is a fragile artifact, easily obscured by the well-intentioned or the mischievous hands of the present. To walk among the stones now is to walk through multiple layers of time, where every pile asks a double question: How old are you, and what do you truly mean? Even the most enduring stones are no match for the slow, patient hunger of time. The Vermont cairns have stood for centuries, but their survival is a fragile, ongoing battle against a quiet army of natural forces. The first enemy is the climate itself. New England winters are a cycle of freeze and thaw, a relentless mechanical stress. Water seeps into tiny cracks in the granite. When it freezes, it expands with immense force, a process called frost heaving that can slowly, over decades, push stones apart and topple the neatest construction. Summer brings its own siege, as the probing fingers of tree roots seek moisture and nutrients, growing beneath and between the rocks, levering them out of alignment. Moss and lichen, while beautiful, retain moisture against the stone and secrete mild acids that contribute to granular disintegration over centuries. This is natural erosion, the landscape's gentle but inexorable reclamation project. A cairn does not simply stand still, it is in a constant, slow-motion state of collapse, fighting gravity and chemistry with every passing season. These natural processes are inevitable, the expected wear on any ancient structure left to the elements, but they are not the most urgent threat. The greater danger walks on two legs. Human activity, both intentional and careless, poses a far more immediate risk to these silent archives. The most destructive act is looting, the misguided belief that digging beneath a cairn will reveal treasure. In reality, it destroys the single most important piece of evidence, the sealed archaeological context of the ground beneath. Once that soil is churned, the relationship between the cairn and the moment it was built is obliterated, erasing any chance of future scientific dating or understanding. Less malicious but equally damaging is the impact of recreation. A hiker, thinking it harmless fun, might add a stone to a pile for good luck or rearrange rocks for a better photograph. This vandalism by enthusiasm alters the structure's original form and integrity. It inserts a modern signature onto an ancient text, corrupting the message for anyone who comes after. Off-trail vehicles and mountain bikes can crush low stone walls and scatter carefully placed platforms. Then there is large-scale development. Logging operations, with their heavy machinery and skid trails, can plow directly through cairn fields before anyone even knows they are there. The push for renewable energy has led to proposals for wind farms on remote ridgelines, precisely the high, exposed places where cairn complexes are often found. Each of these actions, from a single kicked stone to a forest cleared for timber, treats the cairns as irrelevant obstacles rather than irreplaceable cultural treasures. This is the core truth that makes preservation so critical. These sites are non-renewable resources. A broken pot can be glued back together. A disturbed cairn can never be put back in time. The information it held is not in the rocks themselves, but in their precise arrangement, their relationship to each other, and the sealed micro-environment they protected. Once that is lost, it is lost forever. The mystery is not locked in the stones, it is suspended in the space between them. Recognizing this has spurred vital, if often underfunded, conservation efforts. State archaeologists and volunteer groups work to document sites with precise GPS mapping and three-dimensional imaging, creating a digital record that will survive even if the physical site does not. Educational outreach aims to teach hikers and landowners the difference between a historic cairn and a modern trail marker, and the profound importance of leaving them absolutely untouched. Some private landowners have become the most effective stewards, quietly protecting cairn fields on their property for generations. The call for preservation is not a plea to lock the woods away. It is an invitation to see them with new eyes, to understand that the forest floor is not a blank slate but a layered manuscript. Every time we choose to walk around a stone pile rather than over it, every time we report a new site to preservation societies instead of sharing its location publicly online, we become part of the cairn story. We transition from being mere observers of the mystery to becoming guardians of the question itself. ensuring that future generations might still walk into the green silence and feel the same electric wonder, standing before a message from the past that has not yet been erased. So we stand before a field of silent stones, surrounded by a forest of competing ideas. Each theory offers a key, but none seems to open the entire lock. To move forward, we must weigh them side by side, examining the strengths and glaring weaknesses of each proposed explanation. First, the agricultural clearing theory. On the pro side, the logic is beautifully simple and rooted in a visible, documented history. We know settlers cleared millions of stones from New England fields. The existence of so many rock piles seems like an obvious extension of that exhausting work. The theory is comfortable and requires no leap into the unknown. But the cons are devastating. It fails completely on location. Farmers did not haul tons of stone up steep, rocky, uncultivable hillsides into dense, old-growth forest. It cannot explain the intricate patterns, the platforms, the rows that form clear designs. Most damningly, it ignores the LiDAR evidence showing these complexes in places that have never been farmed. The logic of agriculture breaks down the moment you leave the open field and enter the woods where the cairns actually live. Next, the Native American ceremonial theory. The evidence here is compelling. It has strong cultural precedent, with cairn building being a known practice among many indigenous peoples for memorials, trail markers, and sacred sites. The placement near water sources aligns perfectly with spiritual traditions that view springs as sacred portals. The astronomical alignments, while debated, suggest a deep attunement to natural cycles. Most importantly, this theory respects the people who were unquestionably here for thousands of years, possessing the intimate knowledge of the landscape such a project would require. Yet the con is the infamous artifact vacuum. The complete lack of associated tools, pottery, or campfire debris at these sites is a profound puzzle. If these were hubs of ceremony, where is the material evidence of the people who performed them? The silence is so deep it has fueled a century of skepticism. Finally, the transatlantic voyager or Celtic theory. Its primary pro is its emotional and narrative power. It is exciting, romantic, and provides a direct, familiar analog in the Old World cairns. For those seeking a dramatic rewrite of history, it is a thrilling story. But the cons are absolute. It lacks any credible archaeological evidence beyond a superficial resemblance in shape. There are no Celtic artifacts, no settlements, no DNA, no linguistic traces, and the alleged Ogham inscriptions have been thoroughly debunked by experts. It also commits a grave error by implicitly dismissing the capacity of indigenous cultures to create complex landscape architecture, suggesting such work must have come from across the ocean. The theory is built on desire, not data, so where does this leave us? Each theory explains a piece, but is shattered by another. The agricultural theory explains the material but not the design. The native theory explains the purpose but not the eerie material silence. The Celtic theory explains nothing with evidence, only with wishful thinking. This stalemate suggests a crucial possibility. Perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Maybe we are searching for a single, monolithic answer, when the truth is far more layered and human. Could the answer be a combination? What if some cairns are indeed ancient Native American ceremonial sites, built with a ritual cleanliness that left no artifacts? What if others, especially those on more accessible land, are later additions or adaptations by indigenous peoples during the colonial period, or even by settlers who encountered the old stones and added their own, continuing a tradition without understanding its origin? The landscape itself holds the final clue. The sheer number and variety of cairns, from solitary markers to vast complexes, likely means they served multiple purposes across millennia. They are not a single sentence from the past, but an entire anthology written by different hands in different eras. for reasons both sacred and practical that have now blurred into one magnificent, impenetrable mystery. The stones do not owe us a simple story. They offer instead a profound lesson in humility, reminding us that the past is rarely a tidy puzzle, but more often a beautiful, fragmented mosaic where the most important pieces are sometimes the questions themselves. There is a quiet magic in the act of finding one. After hours of reading theories and staring at maps, you step into the cool shade of the trees. The intellectual puzzle is replaced by a more primal feeling. Your eyes scan the ground, moving from mossy stone to mossy stone, until suddenly the pattern clicks. That is not a random scatter, that is a shape. A low, deliberate dome of granite, half swallowed by ferns. In that moment the centuries collapse, your breath catches. You are not just learning about history, you are touching it. The thrill is deeply personal, a private conversation between you and a builder whose name and world are lost. This is the intangible heart of the mystery, the reason these stones captivate far beyond academic debate. They transform a walk in the woods into a voyage of discovery. One modern explorer described the sensation as a soft electric shock, a jolt of recognition that someone, long ago, stood in this exact spot and decided this place mattered. The sites possess a quiet, almost eerie beauty. Sunlight filters through the canopy, dappling the ancient stones. The only sounds are the wind in the leaves and the distant call of a bird. The silence feels heavy, not empty, but full of unspoken stories. It is a humbling space. You feel watched, not by anything menacing, but by time itself. Another seeker recalled finding a perfect line of cairns marching up a remote hillside at dusk. As the light faded, the stones seemed to glow with a faint internal light, and a profound sense of peace settled over the place, a feeling of being in a sanctuary that demanded nothing but quiet respect. This emotional pull is what blurs the line between expert and enthusiast. The mystery does not require a degree in archaeology. It only requires curiosity and a willingness to look at the familiar landscape with new eyes. The local hiker who notices an odd pile off the trail, the landowner who finds a strange stone row in the back 40, the history teacher who brings students to a site, they all become detectives. They are gathering the clues, photographing the evidence, and asking the first vital questions. This democratization of discovery is powerful. It means the next great insight might not come from a university lab, but from someone who simply knows their own woods better than anyone else. The cairns invite everyone into the story. They remind us that history is not confined to textbooks and museums. It is lying in plain sight, waiting in the forests we drive past every day. This personal connection is the mystery's greatest gift. It forges a link across time, a shared glance between you and an unknown ancestor who also found meaning in these hills. The stones ask us not just to solve them, but to feel them, to wonder, and to stand for a moment in the green, silent company of a question that may never have a final answer. The stones hold their secrets, but the questions they raise echo into the future. We are left standing at the edge of a vast, silent library, unable to read the language of its texts. The fundamental mysteries remain stubbornly intact. Who were the builders? We have compelling candidates, but no definitive proof. When precisely were these cairns constructed? The timeline is a blur spanning millennia, a frustrating lack of precision that prevents us from connecting the dots to known historical events. And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what was their specific purpose? Was it a single unified function across the entire region, or did these stone piles serve many roles? Trail markers for some, memorials for others, astronomical observatories or spring shrines for still more. We see the physical evidence of ceremony in the platforms and alignments, but we cannot hear the chants or understand the rituals that brought people to these forest clearings. How did these sites fit into the daily life and spiritual worldview of the people who made them? The artifact vacuum suggests these were special places, set apart, but that only deepens the wonder about what happened there. The adventure is far from over. New technologies promise to shine fresh light into this ancient darkness. The revolution of LiDAR is only beginning. Comprehensive aerial surveys of entire states could reveal the full, breathtaking network, showing how these sites connect across watersheds and mountain ranges in ways we can barely conceive. In the laboratory, scientists are developing ever more sensitive ways to analyze the microscopic world. Sophisticated soil DNA analysis, for instance, might one day detect the faintest genetic traces of human presence, skin cells, hair, or other organic material that have lingered in the protected soil beneath a cairn, even after all visible artifacts have vanished. Improved dating techniques, perhaps using advances in optically stimulated luminescence that can determine when a buried stone was last exposed to sunlight, could finally attach firm dates to these constructions, ending the centuries of guesswork. A true breakthrough would not be a single eureka, a moment, but a convergence of evidence. Imagine a future where LiDAR maps a perfect celestial alignment across 50 miles of forest. At the central cairn of that alignment, a new soil analysis recovers ancient environmental DNA pointing to human activity. Then, a novel geological dating method applied to the stones themselves confirms they were placed in a tight window around 2,000 years ago. That triangulation of mapping, biology, and chronology would shatter the stalemate. It would allow us to finally place these monuments into a real historical context, to understand them not as isolated curiosities, but as active components of a living, breathing culture. Until that day comes, the mystery remains a gift. It is an open invitation to look at the landscape with wonder, to remember that history is not a closed book, but a story still being uncovered, stone by patient stone. The search itself, the careful mapping, the respectful observation, the collaborative debate keeps the past alive. The cairns do not need to be solved to be meaningful. Their enduring power lies in their silence, in their ability to make us stop to wonder, and to humbly acknowledge that some stories are written not to be easily read, but to remind us of all we have yet to learn. That sense of discovery is a powerful call to adventure, but it comes with an equally powerful responsibility. The thrill of finding a cairn is a gift from the past, and our only ethical duty is to protect that gift for the future. If this mystery has sparked a desire to see these stones for yourself, the first step is not grabbing a map, but adopting a mindset of stewardship. Your greatest tool is not a shovel, but restraint. The cardinal rule is absolute. Do not move a single stone, do not dig around the base, do not add rocks to a pile or rearrange them for a better photograph. These structures are fragile historical documents, and even a minor disturbance can erase centuries of subtle context, destroying the very clues that might one day solve the mystery you find so compelling. Think of it this way: you are not visiting a park. You are entering an archive where every volume is written in a language we are still trying to decipher. Your role is that of a careful reader, not an editor. The safest and most rewarding way to satisfy your curiosity is to connect with the community of people who have been studying this landscape for decades. Organizations like the New England Antiquities Research Association, NEARA, are invaluable. They are not a club of secretive treasure hunters, but a network of dedicated citizen scientists who organize guided field trips to documented sites, led by experienced members who can explain what you are seeing and model proper respect. Joining a group like this transforms a solitary search into a shared learning experience. You contribute to the collective knowledge, and you ensure your exploration leaves no negative impact. Before you venture onto any land, you must know whose land it is. Many cairn sites are on private property. Trespassing is not only illegal, it erodes the trust between landowners and researchers, potentially leading to sites being closed off forever. If you are on public land, like a state forest, familiarize yourself with the specific rules. Some areas may have protections for archaeological resources, and it is your job to know and follow them. Embrace the principles of leave no trace as your personal code. This means staying on established trails whenever possible to prevent erosion. If you must go off trail to observe a site, tread lightly. Pack out everything you bring in, and never use spray paint or ribbons to mark your way, as these modern additions scar the historical and natural environment. Your goal is to be invisible, to pass through the woods without leaving any sign that you were ever there. The adventure is in the observation, not the alteration. For those who want to dive deeper from home, there are wonderful resources, books by researchers like James Maver and Byron Dix, or more recent works by authors engaging with the sacred landscape theory, provide a foundation. The websites of state archaeological societies and NEARA itself offer archives of photographs and reports. Some local museums, particularly in Vermont and New Hampshire, have exhibits or collections related to the region's indigenous history and early settlement, providing crucial context for the world in which the cairns were built. This transformation from passive viewer to responsible explorer is the most meaningful way to engage with the mystery. By choosing to protect these sites, you become part of their ongoing story. You help ensure that the silent question posed by the stones will still be there, waiting in the green twilight, for the next curious person who feels that quiet, electric pull of the past. Your respect is the key that keeps the mystery alive. From a simple pile of stones to a profound, multi-layered enigma, the journey through Vermont's hidden forests has been a revelation. We began with a solitary rock mound, a curiosity in the woods, and followed its trail into a vast, interconnected puzzle that spans disciplines. It is a story woven from the threads of archaeology, where silent soil defies explanation, of astronomy, where stones may have charted the cosmos, and of cultural history, where competing narratives clash over who gets to write the past. The Vermont Mystery Cairns are more than a local oddity. They are a microcosm of how we understand history itself, a debate between hard evidence and haunting possibility. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that some chapters of the human story are written in a language we have forgotten how to read. Their endurance is a testament to the hidden, layered depths of the American landscape, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet often holds memories far older and more complex than our textbooks suggest. This story does not end with a definitive answer because the cairns themselves are an open question. They remain, as they have for centuries, a silent invitation. The greatest mysteries are not always found in the lost cities of distant continents or the depths of the ocean. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, woven into the familiar hills and forests we pass by every day. They wait only for a shift in perspective, for a curious eye to look past the trees and see the stones and to wonder, what forgotten stories does your own landscape hold? Have you ever stumbled upon something old and unexplained in the woods near you? Share your own experiences, thoughts, or local mysteries in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, consider subscribing for more adventures where history, mystery, and landscape collide. The past is all around us, waiting to be seen anew.